Hey YouTube, this is Archangel for Truth, and today I'm talking to you about the 10th Amendment and why the 10th Amendment is very important to be understood correctly. And there are parts of the 10th Amendment that are being, well, shall we say, ignored. And it's those things I wish to talk to you about. So, in order for us to do that, I'm going to go ahead and read the 10th Amendment for you and explain the purpose of it, and then I will explain what part of the 10th Amendment is intentionally being ignored. And so here it goes. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And so it's under it's important to understand why the 10th Amendment was established. The 10th Amendment was to limit the powers of the federal government over the states. That's what its intention was established for. They didn't want a federal government that got too powerful and too big. So what this did is it reserved certain powers, respectively, to the states or to the people. Now, one must ask a very important question when reading the 10th Amendment. Why does the 10th Amendment separate states and or to the people? Because we all know that states are made of people. You couldn't have a state being established unless people established it. So, therefore, when it's referring to or to the people, it's separating people from the state. Now, this is very important because there are individuals that have misconstrued the meaning of the 10th. Now, you got to understand the purpose of the 10th was to limit the federal government's power. But today, it's being used to expand state powers over the people. And this is ridiculous because ultimately it's the people where rights and freedoms are being reserved for. And so the problem is when you have a government that is focused in on state rights over the people's rights. This is the problem that we have today. So, in dealing with many individuals about the 10th Amendment, they will use the 10th Amendment to explain, well, the state has the right to regulate and do all these things. And according to the 10th, it does. But now here's the problem. The problem is with the last part of the 10th Amendment, where it says that these powers are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Now, one would think that if it was talking about If it was talking about people within these states, it would say reserved respectively to the states and the people therein. It wouldn't separate them with the word or. Or means this or that. So this is important because, as I said, even the Supreme Court has ruled as regards to this, and personally I believe that the Supreme Court made a mistake in its ruling because it failed to clearly explain this final part of the 10th Amendment. And so it simply said, well, the states have the powers to do this and this and that. And so where I'm getting at with this is because what has happened is you have states that are now able to violate people's inalienable rights based upon the 10th and an incorrect reading of the 10th. To me, I'm a textualist. I believe in going according to the original text, according to the purpose of why it was written. So it's not just enough to read the text, you have to understand the purpose of the text as well. So when I tell you that the purpose of the 10th Amendment was to limit the federal government, that was its original intent, to limit that. So did this mean that the intent was to give states this overbroad powers for them to override your rights and replace your rights with regulations? And I don't believe that that is a correct reading of the 10th at all. And I think that's why the 10th does make that separation of or to the people. Because in order for you to understand this, you have to understand how this nation was established. It was basically people. You didn't have these varying states that we have to the extent that we have today, where they have all these 50 different states, whereas early on you just had just the original 13 colonies, and eventually they called these things states, basically. So the purpose for the federal government is, in fact, for the purpose of protecting individual rights. That is what the Declaration of Independence says. The purpose for government is to secure these rights. It's not to expand upon its own powers, regardless of whether that's federal or state. And the Ninth Amendment actually helps us to understand this, because the Ninth Amendment is talking about unenumerated rights and who have these unenumerated rights. It's not to the states that these unenumerated rights belong to. It's not to the federal government that the unenumerated rights belong to. It is solely to the people. Now, it's very important for you to understand this, because in the Ninth Amendment, it clearly stipulates that the government, regardless of state or federal, may not deny or disparage unenumerated rights. And so I've explained what the Ninth Amendment is about in a previous video, but I will briefly explain again. Unenumerated rights are those rights that are not listed within the Constitution, but nevertheless, you have them as your rights. And these rights are uncountable. They're not limited to those things which the government wishes to accept as rights, but rather they are broad and there's no end to them. So again, in clarifying why the people have this power that is being referred to in the 10th, separate and apart from the state, is because the rights and the freedoms that the Constitution are establishing are not there for the sake of the government. They are there for the sake of the people. And that's why I believe the 10th Amendment is referring to the people and saying, not just respectively to the states, but also to the people. And so certainly you could not have states without people agreeing to be a part of that. But now there is a problem when you have people that do not wish to be part of that, such as the case with sovereign individuals. So many within the government and those that are not within the government see sovereign individuals as being anti-government. And I want to clarify that is not the case. What sovereigns actually stand for is they stand for their inalienable rights. They stand for government being bound to the limits that were originally established within the Constitution and the confines of those enumerated powers granted to it via the Constitution. But we have to ask, since the government has breached its limitations in multiple ways, why then should the people choose to accept that? And that's what sovereigns do not accept. They accept the Constitution, they accept the Declaration of Independence, they accept the doctrine called the consent of the governed. They accept all these things. Well, anti-sovereigns will say, well, they don't accept any sort of law. That's a lie. What they accept is the original establishment of these things, not what we have today. What we have today is an overexpanded government that has expanded itself way beyond its limits, and ultimately that's why they do not agree with the government as it is today. So I hope this helps in understanding the 10th Amendment a little better. If you have any questions or comments, please, by all means, leave them. And please like and share this. I really appreciate it when you do. And with that, I'm going to say, God bless you and take care.